In this video, I'm going to show you how to quickly get started with Jira for project managers. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel and drop a like if you get value. Inside of Jira, we're going to create our very first project that is going to be optimized for project management. And so you're going to do that by clicking on the plus button here, and then we're going to pick on software development. Now, if you're not a Jira admin, you're going to have a little bit of a harder time. So you may need to work with your Jira admin to create this project. Now, because this video is tailored for project managers, we're going to go down the agile project management route. And specifically, we're going to take advantage of all the bells and whistles. So we're going to pick Scrum. And so with that said, here I am on the Scrum screen. I'm going to click on Scrum. This gives you an overview of what you're getting when you select Scrum. We're going to click on Use Template up here on the top. And then we have to determine, do we want team or company managed? Now, because we want all the bells and whistles, we are going to pick company managed. However, if you wanted to, you could pick team managed project if you're completely new to Jira and you want to be able to do all these things without having to rely on your Jira admin. But let me warn you, if you want your Jira to scale, if you're going to take what we're going to develop here in this project and we're going to apply it to other teams, and you want other teams to also participate in the same steps, in the same process, the same framework, then company is going to be the only way you're going to want to go. But if you're just a team of one and you're just trying that Jira out for the first time, then team managed is going to be just fine for you. So I'm going to go with company managed here, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to go a demo for project managers. Notice that it's going to take the first letter of each word and make a key. This is something that is hard to read. DFPM doesn't roll off the tip of your tongue. And so we're just going to call it proj, right? We want to rename this to something that is easy to say and converse because you're going to say these letters a lot in your language. And so make sure you pick something that is easy to articulate. Don't worry about the share settings. This is going to be one of those benefits of being in the company managed project where in the future, when we make new projects, we're going to be able to use this project here as a template and other projects will share the same settings. This is a benefit because we're in this company managed project. Click on next when you're done, and then we're going to make a selection here. If you're a software team, you're going to want to connect to your code repository. We'll do that later. If you're using Confluence, you can connect to your space. We can do that later as well. Click on continue, which is right here. And now we are in our very first Jira project. Now this is a Scrum project, and I can tell because it says active sprint, and we have our backlog. And I'm going to show you essentially in the next few minutes how to take advantage of this, how to put work into your backlog, how to prioritize and groom and rank your backlog. Then I'm going to show you how to create your very first sprint, how to plan your very first sprint, how to execute on that very first sprint, and then what happens at the end. And so within this video, you should know enough in Jira to be very productive, yet very dangerous all at the same time. So it all starts with putting work into Jira. Now there's a couple of different ways. We can always click the create button up here. We can create stories. We have the ability to go to the backlog, go to the bottom of the backlog, and we can create issues down here. And if we already know what we want to work on, we can actually create them inside of the sprint already. But that's not the way I like to operate. Because I'm a project manager, I'm always thinking bigger, right? I'm always thinking top down. And I usually have some sort of a feature or capability, some big requirement that I want to deliver. And because of that, I'm going to actually start off in the timeline because I like to start big and then we're going to define small. And so inside the timeline view here, I'm going to pick a feature or functionality that I'm going to be developing, right? And so my very first feature capability is add a checkout cart to the website. And so that's going to be a big capability, right? Something big, something epic, hence the name of the work type, which is epic, right? We don't want our epics to be small little tasks. Our epics should be pretty big, not massive that they're like initiatives or themes or something like that, but big enough that it's going to take us maybe a couple weeks, maybe a few weeks to complete. Definitely no more than like a month or two, but it's definitely big in scope, okay? And so we have our add a checkout cart. Now, what's interesting is because we created an epic, you would think we have something in our backlog, but here's a lot of Jira that you should be aware of. Your backlog is only going to show your stories, your tasks, and your bugs, and occasionally your subtasks, but we'll get into that later. But epics are not visible on your board. And that is to say, you don't actually work on epics. You work on the stories underneath that epic, which is what we're going to show you next. And so keep that in mind that you will be using your epics to organize your data, but you don't necessarily plan or work or take action on those epics. So think of epics as a container, which is a little different than what agile states, right? Because agile states that an epic is just a really, really big story that needs to be broken down. And that's true in Jira as well, but it's also a container. It lets us bucketize our work and contain it and visually see that containerization. So very useful benefit. Okay, so we have our Epic and we're going to add a checkout cart. Now, if we click into here, we're going to be able to add a description, right? And so we can add a little bit more context. But because, we live in the world of AI, I'm going to type in AI and I'm going to brainstorm. I'm going to brainstorm some ideas, right? And so I'm going to just talk to it, right? I'm going to talk to it like I would in natural language, which is prompt engineering. And so I'm going to tell it, I am building a checkout for an e-commerce site. This checkout cart, oops, I need to add cart here, needs to show me the item, the quantity of that item, and the price. Also include any other things that a typical checkout cart should have. And so when I hit enter, it's going to go and help me, right? Because I know that I need the quantity, I know I need the object itself, but what else am I missing? And so here's where we're going to let AI help us out. So we're going to display a list of items in the cart with their names and images. We're going to show the quantity of each item with the options to increase or decrement the quantity. So I hadn't even thought about that one. We're going to include the price of each item, subtotal, taxes, shipping costs, the option to remove an item if you don't want it, offer to continue shopping so that you can go back, and implement a checkout button to proceed. So this is awesome. This is exactly what I wanted, and we're going to insert it. Now, when I hit save, you're going to notice that this is just in my description. And so this isn't anything that's actionable. The backlog itself is not showing anything yet. And this, my friends, is again now where the beauty of Atlassian Intelligence is going to come in. So we're going to go back into that Epic, and this time I'm going to click on this add button, and I'm going to add a child issue. And check this out. They have a little Atlassian Intelligence button. And so I'm going to simply click on that button. And because I gave it a pretty good title, but an even better description, watch what it's doing. It's going to take all those items that we know have to be in our basically stories, right? These are the things that we need to go do. And I'm just going to accept all because it's going to do the heavy lifting for me. And so now as a project manager, I can just cross-reference this with my requirements and basically just make sure that all my requirements are in here. But everything looks good for me and I've already accepted them. And so now back over here on the left-hand side, you're gonna notice that I can now expand. So I'm gonna close that window out and I can expand these items and I can see all of the stories underneath. Now, because I'm a project manager, dates and time are important to me. And so in this timeline view, you're going to get another added benefit because not only are we going to be able to visually see the decomposition of our work, but for certain items, specifically our epics, we can also start calling out dates and times. So here I am towards the tail end of June, and I'm just going to say, you know what, today's a Monday. Let's just start it off today. We're going to give ourselves 21 days to complete this particular epic. Right? This is a forecast. This is what we predict. And so all of the stories underneath are going to have to somehow comply and conform to this schedule. And so now that I have that one, I can go and create another epic, right? And so this is going to be add a payment processor for customer to pay, right? And so we're going to do a very similar thing. We have another epic. And this time I'm going to do the same thing with AI. And I'm going to have a brainstorm. And we're going to tell it, I need to collect a payment from the customer and need to build this out. Give me everything I need to build this payment processor. A little vague this time. I'm not as detailed as I was the first time. And as you can see, it's going to do a pretty good job as we need SSL certificates for PCI compliance, all this good stuff. So I'm going to hit insert because all those look great. Hit save, and now that I have those tasks, now I can click on the add button again and generate the child issues, use the AI, and let it go and generate those work items based on that description, which is all generated by AI. Again, full disclosure, you're going to want to cross-reference this with your requirements, with your product managers, right, with your customer management folks, whoever's in charge of giving you those requirements, you're going to want to cross-reference this stuff, but this just makes this part of the process a little bit easier. And so these are all good. I'm going to accept them all and we're going to put them in there. Now, As a project manager, you're probably not going to be the one that's putting in all the work, but it's important for us to have examples, right? It's important for us to have data in our Jira so I can show you how to use Jira more effectively. But I figure this is a bonus, right? Maybe you want to augment what you got as a requirement. Maybe you just want to cross reference it yourself with what AI comes up with. And so this is pretty beneficial to help you out. But the most important thing is we now have epics that have stories and we can put dates on stuff. Because as a project manager, now I can show you what this actually looks like. And so I given dates to the first epic and dates to the second epic. And now I can link them together. So I can hover over the first epic and I see this little dot, which turns into a link, and I can hover over the next one. And now they're linked. You'll notice that the line is red, and that is because the end of the first task is after the start of the second task. And so we want to fix that. And we can do that by moving dates around. And this is going to help us manage expectations because now, as a project manager, we can articulate, hey, we have a conflict on our schedule here. So something's going to have to shift. Either you remove scope or you accept the new dates, or you do what you got to do as a project manager to get your dates to comply. But at least now we can visualize them in Jira. And so now that we have two epics and we have a bunch of stories underneath, you're going to notice that our stories don't have dates. And that is because fundamentally we have to make a decision. As a project manager, we probably want dates on everything, right? The epics and the stories, task bugs, everything should get a date. However, because Jira is an agile-based project management tool, our dates are inherited by the sprint. And so since we're going to be using sprints for this project, then the start and the end date of the story isn't something we get to define, but rather it gets defined by the duration of the sprint. And so you can be on either camp. I'm going to allow either option for you. But natively, Jira is going to work based off the sprint. So the moment I put these stories into a sprint and I put values and dates into that sprint, these dates are going to populate. However, if you wanted to change it, if you wanted to have control, because maybe you're not an agile based team, you're going to click on actions, you're going to configure your timeline, and you want to click on this first rater button, which allows you to schedule by start and due date. So when I click back to board on the top right corner and I go back to my timeline and I expand those epics, now you have the option to draw, see how I now have these dates that I can create. However, because I'm a agilist here, we're going to go by sprint dates and just let the sprint define our dates, which naturally now takes us into our backlog. So we're done with the timeline. The timeline has achieved what we wanted it. We are able to visually see all of our work. We were able to decompose our work, and we're able to see the dependencies of our work. So awesome. This is all good. We'll come back to it in a minute, but for now, we are done with our timeline. So in our backlog, you're going to notice that in the bottom of the backlog, I now have a lot of stories. I have 20 stories. And these are the ones that were auto-created by AI. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color of my epic just to show you how this looks on your board, because all this pink here could be a little overwhelming. So I'm actually going to go back to the timeline, open up my first epic, and this little square here allows you to change the epic color. So I'm going to go with the blue one on this one, and feel free to open up the other one and change it to a different color if you want. But I would recommend that you have each epic be its own unique color, because when we're viewing it in the backlog, then it's going to be a lot more easier to say, okay, all of these belong to this epic and all of these belong to this other epic. Of course, you can always read the name, but if you title them, like I have add a, right? There's too many characters to start the same, so you can easily confuse them. And so now that we have our backlog, what you want to do here is you want to refine, you want to groom, you want to ultimately rank and prioritize your backlog. And as a project manager, you might want to take a little bit of a Scrum class if you've never done it this way. But essentially, this is your opportunity to take all of the stuff, right? We're just going to define it as stuff that your team needs to work on, which is a lot of stuff, right? And we want to make it make sense. We want to take the items that are the most critical items and we want to move them towards the top. And so for each one of these items, they're rankable. And so we can move them up and down. So I can go like that. I can also right click on something and move it down. I can right click and move it to the bottom. And so I don't have to drag and drop, especially if you have hundreds, if not, well, you can put up to 5,000 items in your backlog. So if you have hundreds or thousands of items, this can get a little annoying, a little confusing. And so it's easier to just right click and move it where you want it. So if you have something down here, maybe this is important, we can move it to the top very easily without having to lock and scroll and get lost in the backlog there. And so here we have our backlog. And so you want to go through this exercise of grooming and refinement, right? I've mentioned it a couple of times. We won't cover it in detail, but just in a nutshell, each of these tasks should have some sort of a definition already, right? They should have good requirements, right? They should have a good description. They should have a good title. They should have the information that your team needs in order to be successful with it. Because if you just have generic titles and generic descriptions, then when your developer or that individual contributor needs to go work on this stuff, they're going to be overwhelmed and very confused and very lost. And so you want to make this as easy as possible for them. So you want to get good requirements for them. And I think that's a really good critical part of being a project manager is making sure that your team is set up for success there. And so make sure you have good requirements, good descriptions, good definitions of ready, right? And we're going to be able to go to the next step. And so the next step is once your backlog is groomed and refined, and let's just assume that it's in the right order, now we can go into our sprint. And so when you create a project for the first time, your very first sprint will exist. So all we need to do is click on add dates. However, if your sprint didn't exist for whatever reason, you can click on this create sprint button here, and then your first sprint will be created. So once here, we can click on this pencil and we can add dates, and we're going to do 2-week dates, with today being the start date. So that means that natively in 2 weeks, we will have our end date. We can also put a sprint goal if you want to. So what is the objective of the sprint? You can put that in there, click on update, and now we have our dates. And so now that we have some dates, now we can simply grab the item from the top of our backlog, because that should be the most important thing, and we're going to move it into our sprint 1. And so we're just going to do that. And then you move things in. Now, naturally, the question is, well, when do you stop? When do you know you've added just enough work? Well, this is where you now have to, again, tap into your agile trainings, because we now need to estimate the work. So we need to put story points on all these items. So some of these are going to be a 3, right? Make sure you watch videos on Fibonacci and how to story point, and make sure you subscribe, because we are going to be dropping videos on how to properly story point and estimate all this work, right? But you're going to want to make sure that every one of these items that are in your sprint has some sort of numeric value, aka your story points. Again, subscribe. We're going to go over those details in a much later video. You also have your priorities. So these are all critical, but you could always change them, right? Have these conversations with your team and really find out what's the most important part. These are also rankable, so you can move them, and Jira's going to remember their order. And so this looks like the right order. And the last thing you want to do is assign these. Now, this is an optional step, but if you do assign your work, magical things will happen. So if I start doing this here and I start assigning this work to people on my team, then watch what happens. I get this view here where I can click on these ellipses, and now I can see the work, who's got what work, how many of each type, and how many total story points. And so when we have velocities and capacities and just resource management in general, we can get a good feel and understanding sprint by sprint what's going on with our team. And so we can basically be more strategic in how much work we're assigning to each individual. Now, keep in mind that this particular sprint is a holiday, and so people might be on break. And so these 2 individuals might actually only be available for 1 or 2 days of the sprint. So it makes sense that Alana takes on more work if Alana's not planning on taking any additional time off. And so this is a great view to balance and make sure that that's actually happening. Once you're done with that, once you've reviewed all this, once you've assigned and everybody's appropriately tasked and all the most critical work that you need to work on is in your sprint, then all you got to do is hit the start sprint button. And when you do that, you can double check your work here. You can double check your durations. You can double check your goal. But all you need to do is click on that start sprint. And now we're in our sprint. And so the name of the game here is to take every item from the left and move it to the far right as much as possible. Now, this is the out-of-the-box workflow. This is the to-do and progress and done from the project template that we picked. You do have the ability to add more columns, although you may need to work with your Jira admin, especially since we picked company managed, and there's a lot of nuances that you need to know. But just know that the objective here is to move items from the left all the way to done, right? And your team wants to move that within the bounds, within the dates as dictated by that sprint. Because if you don't, then we have sprint rollover, and then anything that didn't make it to the farthest right column will then either go to the next sprint automatically, or you have the option to move it to the top of your backlog, which is never a good, neither scenario is ever good, because now you had a plan. And as a project manager, this is where we struggle the most, because we have our plans, right? We made our plans. We know what we wanted to do, but because we didn't finish all of our commitments, now parts of our plan get pushed out. And this is now the struggle that we have as project managers. And so you're going to want to deal with that. Now, as your team is working on stuff, you can go and look at your timeline, and you're going to see that if we expand these things, some of these now have dates because, again, they're in sprints. And the things that don't have dates, they never made it to a sprint. And so if you have a specific milestone or a specific delivery date that you need to get to, this helps you plan out your sprints. And so you can actually go into your backlog and you can make a couple more sprints. So you can click on this create sprint button here and make another sprint or two. However, I would not recommend that you make anything beyond 2 sprints, because from an agile perspective, it's really difficult to predict the future. And because of that sprint rollover that I just discussed, you run a high probability. In fact, anywhere between 20 to 50% of your sprint is going to roll over to the next sprint natively and naturally. And so don't get too hung up on creating like the perfect schedule, because it's going to not be true very, very soon. And so I think that's one of the hardest things to own as a project manager, especially if you're a more traditional waterfall type of project manager, because in the world of agile, we're a little bit more forgiving for date slips, and we're okay with date slips. We're okay with that. And Jira is going to be okay with it too. But you as a project manager might not be okay. So you're going to have to, get the whip out and get your team to actually hit their commitments. But we can see a lot of this information here. So again, I'm just going to move a couple of items. I would not move a whole lot, because you remember your sprint 1 work will most likely carry over. Not all of it, but a good chunk. But when we do this, you can see that our timeline over here has a few more dates now. And we can see that we have items that are going to finish after our epic's due date. And you can see that Jira is telling us, hey, parents here are going to end after this due date. And so we now have the ability to go back and discuss with our team and our stakeholders and go, look, here's the situation. We're planning out our sprints. Our work's going to bleed into another week. And so you either push the date on your epic, right? You add more date to your epic, or you cut some scope, right? You say, okay, well, since we have to finish by this date, what can we actually deliver? What should we reprioritize? And that's going to let you visually see this information so you can make those determinations. Now, over back on the sprint side, as your project manager or as your scrum master, right? People should be helping the team move progress. Make sure your team's actually updating their Jira tickets, because if they don't update their Jira tickets, then your board is going to be useless. But let's fast forward a few days. We're at the end of our sprint. Your team is done, and this is the reality. We have one thing we never got to, one thing that's in progress, and 2 items that actually got completed. So as your scrum master or whoever's running the sprints, maybe it's you, you're going to come in here, hit the complete sprint button, and then Jira's going to ask you, do you want to move the items that didn't get finished? Because we finished 2, but we didn't finish 2. And those items, do we want to move them to the next sprint, or do we want to move them to a different sprint, or do we want to move them to the backlog? So you have 3 options there. I'm going to just roll them, and then it's going to ask you, do you want to create a retrospective? This is something we do in Confluence. I'm not going to do it for this video, but subscribe, because we are going to be doing how to run retrospectives in future videos. We hit complete sprint here, and now we're automatically in sprint 2. We have absorbed, right? These 2 items are the ones we just absorbed. These 3 are the ones that are not planned. And basically, we rinse and repeat. And you do that forever and ever and ever until you retire or you run out of money, whichever comes first. Hopefully this video was valuable, but that's essentially how you quickly get started with Jira. I'm skipping a lot of details in it, right? There's a lot of nuances. But if you needed to be productive and just effective in Jira in just a few minutes, this is the video that I would watch and know, because what I just showed you here is going to give you just enough information to be effective with Jira and start making progress. But of course, the devil's in the details. So make sure you subscribe, because we're going to be dropping a lot more videos showing you how to do a lot more advanced things. And make sure you drop a like if you get value out of this video. And more importantly, if you get stuck or you need help with anything, I have partnered up with my good friends over at Release Team, link down in the description. Reach out to them. They have an army of Jira folks that are ready to help you out with all this stuff. And so if you and your team need a little bit more extra help, my good friends over at Release Team are at the ready and willing to help you out. So make sure you reach out to them, let them know that I sent you, and I'll see you in the next one.